Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that that the House now resolve itself into standing Finance Committee.
Questions that the House resolve itself into standing Finance Committee. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This Honourable House is now in standing Finance Committee. When we were suspended, we were under head 83, Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security. We now revert to that head, Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chairman, I seek permission for my team to join me.
Permission so granted, Minister. Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, I want to congratulate you and your team for the excellent presentation thus far and the work that you're doing on behalf of the people of Barbados and of Barbados itself. Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, I would like to raise a few questions. The first is that I've read the strategic goals of the ministry. which in essence are to provide leadership to the agricultural sector by first becoming relevant through a process of strategic transformation, which includes digital, structural, and process deconstruction and reconstruction, and many others. But that one in particular struck me. And it says to me that the ministry is looking to engage itself in a process of serious introspection with a view to becoming modern and to serving Barbados in a way that is modern and progressive. But my question then is in relation to the inclusion around this model, because it stands to reason that such a transformation is going to require everybody. And therefore, I have a question as it relates to how inclusive is the ministry in executing this model. And I ask particularly in relation to a few things. Firstly, there are a number of older farmers who might have forgotten things that we in this room will never know. And I would like to know how involved are the traditional farmers who really would have been the backbone of the agricultural industry in Barbados. To what extent are they involved in this new transformative model? I also want to know about the inclusion of the Rasta community. I hear people referring to them as the Rastafarians, but I remember as a young man, a Rasta told me that he can't be no Rastafarian because he fears nothing. So I want to know how involved is those who practice the belief of Rastafari in the cannabis industry. To what extent are they included in this new model? And of course, for those of us who represent urban constituencies like myself, I heard you speak of Project CARE, which is a brilliant program. I hope to get some of the benefits of Project CARE, but beyond that, my question is in relation to the build-out of urban persons who have an interest in farming. For example, I know we discuss layers, we discuss the Pine Basin, and to what extent will those kind of facilities, that kind of land space beyond Project CARE, be made available to persons who are in the urban community, but who also wish to be included in the farming revolution, in as much as this is a revolution. So that is my first question, as it speaks just to the inclusivity in being able to achieve what I see as a very transformative vision, but must remain participatory if it is to reap its true benefits.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thanks for those questions. I believe they're critical so that the members of Parliament and indeed the general public will have a good idea of what is taking place in terms of providing opportunities for participation and how that is being rolled out. Equally, how we are aligning our work with our strategic goals, which is critical because one may have set goals, but may not have been able to align those goals to specific objectives. And so therefore, I deem the question to be an extremely good one. The first thing that I'd like to say to you is that the farmers who have served this country over many decades, many of them have moved on, but we've been able to secure the services of some of them, some of the critical ones who would have given us in excess of 25, 30 years. And the ministry this year is establishing what is called a crop production unit under the BADMC. And I would allow the CEO and his team to speak to that in some detail. What the crop production unit is going to deliver for us is the use of these experienced farmers working with the young ones that we are bringing in, the inexperienced farmers. Because when we look through the feed program and when we look at Project CARE, we recognize that many of the people who are participating have keen interests but are highly lacking in skills. And therefore, a lot of mistakes are being made. And what we are seeking to do is to correct those mistakes so that we don't demotivate people and they leave the sites feeling demoralized. The crop production unit is designed to take on all of those areas that we brought in under the feed program, which will be Lears being one, Pine Basin, Spencer's, Bath River. And the purpose of doing this is because we want to allow for people to participate in the space. Pine Basin, for example, will have commercial farming in addition to allotment gardening, which allows for a similar model to what we are using at Lears. And then Lears itself, which is much bigger than Pine Basin, also allows for urban farmers to participate. So you have two areas where people from the urban corridor can participate. And then when we go up to Spencer's, that also can provide an opportunity, but then that would attract people more from Christchurch and St. Philip. Up at River, we then take people from most of St. Philip and some of St. John. I will allow the CEO acting at BADMC to take you through all of what is happening, what is taking place, what is currently on the ground, the level of cultivation that is taking place, the amount of acres that we are bringing back into production, and how we are setting up the allotment gardens using the system that we spoke of with the master gardeners. So, Mr. Innes, you can go through, and then I will come back to further this conversation.
All right, good morning. My name is Frederick Innes, Acting CEO at BADMC. So to the, I guess, a number of questions, yes, inclusion is a critical consideration, particularly in the context of the feed program. It was set up first and foremost to cater to those categories of persons on island who are either disadvantaged or not fully included on a normal basis. What we are trying to do across the program is to have persons introduced to farming who do not necessarily have a farming background, but we've provided training at a base level and given them the opportunities to pursue a business venture within the feed program. What we have recognized, however, going through that over the last 2-3 years is that there is a need for additional support, and the minister mentioned the crop production unit in terms of providing those persons with guidance on a day-to-day basis and knowledge. And what we have sought to do is to actually identify a core group of highly experienced farmers and former members of the ministry included, who can give that guidance to persons on a one-on-one basis. So that crop production unit has been identified, and we would have submitted that to the cabinet for consideration. What they will be tasked with is an ongoing day-to-day support, but also to providing guidance in terms of crop planning, providing guidance in terms of agronomic support, use of chemicals for fertilization, for pest control, and being able to actually deliver through those farmers increased production. Many would have started very enthusiastic on the field, but very often within farming, the risk of farming, from weather to pests to control of weeds, those are things that set in very quickly, and very often we have found overtake the individual's enthusiasm. So what we are seeking to do through these experienced farmers, none of them under the age of 50, I would think, but many retired in some respects, but willing and able to provide that continued support. I think at this stage, the initial engagement has occurred, particularly at Lears, where we've started to meet with those farmers, have the crop production team do those initial meetings, understand what is required, understand what's happening on the ground, and starting to chart a way forward even as we work through the approval process with cabinet. So I think the long-term objective is to ensure that we have that effective support mechanism in place for the commercial farmers, but also too for those who may go into the allotment gardens. Those smaller plots, yes, may be easier to manage, but if you have a scenario where someone comes on who does not have pre-existing knowledge or has not necessarily sought to grow crops in the past, They will be given some support as well. The proposal, there is a master gardener team that will be trained up as well, will all be part and parcel of this push towards increased production. So I think, I'm hoping that I've addressed most of the queries. I will mention that in terms of the disabled community, we actually do have one or two groups, one actually located at Ferry Valley, where within the FEED program, they have actually been doing great work. They have a mentorship arrangement, a former teacher, if I remember correctly, who is there and supporting that group, and they're on site every day working hard and seeing real success. So I think we are trying to identify where we can see those opportunities to work with both the disabled community, less advantaged persons, and find ways to help them to progress. Thank you very much.
Also, we can speak to the number of allotment gardens that are going to be made available and the sizes.
Yes.
I know we have 10,000 square foot and 5. You may want to address how many are layers, how many will be in Pine Basin, and address then the catchment areas that we are looking for so that all of the MPs present would understand how the process is working, and you can give a thorough explanation as to how we do the selection to get the farmers on the allotment gardens.
Sure, sorry. So in terms of the acreages that are currently in operation, we have established a number of districts under the FEED program where we have essentially brought lands back into production that had been previously lying fallow. Mount Poyer, it's been mentioned, Wakefield, Spencer's, Lears, Bath, all of those areas we have reintroduced production to through this program. The Lears, peri-urban corridor, the allotment garden section is about 20 acres that has been allocated. 10 and 5,000 square foot allotment gardens that have been set up. The number, I think, is about 100 or 101 gardens at Lears. At Pine Basin, a similar approach, 5 and 10,000 square foot allotments. And I think the total there is 20 or 30. But what we are doing in conjunction with the persons on, I guess, on the ground who have expressed interest. Very often they're either coming to us directly or being referred through the constituency offices. In terms of eligibility, it is, I would say, restricted to those persons who actually are from the urban corridor, and therefore, from that perspective, if you're approaching us for access and you're living in St. John or St. Philip, we would direct you to one of the other districts. But for those who are in the St. Michael, Southern St. Thomas, St. James areas, those are definitely persons who would be considered, and as long as there is available space, we would work to make sure that they have access. Total acreages, I guess, just for knowledge, at Mount Poyer, it is just over 100 acres of land that we have worked to bring back into production. At Wakefield, it's 27 acres. At Spencer's, the total is about 90 acres. We have actually successfully prepared 36 acres at that location, but we're working to introduce another section that will be focused on livestock production in the near future. At Lears, it's 75 acres that's currently split between the commercial and the allotment gardens, and another 20 odd that likely will be added in the not too distant future as well. And at Bath, it's 60 acres, and primarily that has been reserved for the Rastafarian community, and a number of those groups have actually established and are operating at that location. Sorry. Right now, the operations at Bath are focused on open field production. I couldn't speak to the cannabis plan. I know that there were some discussions on that front, but I would have to defer to the BMCLA in terms of the plans in that regard.
In terms of the enfranchisement model that we're using for medicinal cannabis, we had about 4 meetings with the Rastas, and we took from them what it is exactly they would like to see in this model. The information or the feedback that we got from them helped us then to frame how we will go forward in making sure that they can participate. Most of them, if not all, have suggested that the government finance the entire operation on their behalf, and they have cited things about being punished in the past, etc. And so when I combine all the information that I received from the discourse I had with them, we came up with a plan to establish a sort of a value chain operation that allows for them to do cultivation, allows for processing to take place, allow for spa arrangements as well, and allow for a cooperative to be established so that the government, if the government participates, then the participation based on the numbers we looked at would give us an opportunity to put the government in that space for about 2 years to 3 years at most, and by then transition out similar to how we did the sugar industry and allow for them to continue the operation. And the numbers are looking good. What we currently face now is market space, and that is what we are working on. We had some conversations with investors from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we are looking now to see how we can create this enfranchisement model that brings them in where they are comfortable, because that is the most important part of all of this as well. And when we settle this with them, because this is not going to go forward without them coming back to us and taking a presentation on what we're doing for us to get their feedback before we go public with it. And the reason why I'm approaching it this way is because coming off the conversations that I've had with them, there's some critical things that there is that I personally don't see how we can ignore them, and I will want to make sure that we get it right when we roll out. I'll ask Ms. Shanika Roberts-Odle to speak a bit more about what we're doing, and in very short time, we will be coming to Cabinet with a model that should work in terms of economic enfranchisement.
Shanika Roberts-Odle, CEO Acting of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. Thank you, Minister. As the Minister would have indicated, we would have had several meetings with the Rastafarian community in which they would have expressed a number of issues. Their concerns go beyond how the current price of the licenses. Their concerns go towards issues of land space, issues of the actual financing to establish their farms, and to continue on with the processing at the level of standards that would be required. Further to that, their concerns have to do with markets. So we have continued under the guidance of the Minister to look at how we can set out a situation that is established for them to win. As you can agree, it makes no sense giving someone a license when you know they need far more than just a license to be able to establish a successful business. And so under the Minister's leadership, we've looked at how could we set that up, especially in terms of the constraints of government financing and the factor that it cannot continuously, even if we were to set up, be financed by the government. And so we have looked towards how do we set up something that is established with the understanding that government will have to step away in short order, but is financed to the extent that it can continue and to be profitable and successful for them. And as the Minister indicated, we are in the process of looking through proposals to see how we can continue to work the numbers and arrangements into something that works both for the country as a whole and for that community and other communities as would need to be involved in this particular venture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up, sir. I am sure we all appreciate that Rastas in Barbados have suffered tremendous persecution and prosecution in pursuit of what they considered at the time to be their sacrament. I think when if we cast our minds back to the 70s, maybe even the 60s, but the 70s and the 80s, how difficult it was even to walk through this country as Rasta, that as we have put in place affirmative action programs or positive discrimination programs or support programs in general, based on the level of persecution that the Rastafarian community, Rasta community, faced in this country, I do believe we have to put in place every single thing that we can to make sure that they can benefit from whatever benefits are returned to this country and to the people of this country in relation to cannabis. My second question, sir, is that as a former Minister of Maritime and Blue Economy with responsibility for the port, we would have meetings, I think almost weekly at one point, toward improving the competitiveness of this country. You would appreciate that in the port, there are a number of factors that determine how fast a container can move, and how fast we can turn around things, but beyond security, these ports have responsibility for generating revenue and for competitiveness. A big part of that is obviously the role of the Ministry of Agriculture as it relates to, I think it's animal and plant control or whatever the proper title is, but I do know that there's a portion of the ministry that interacts with the Bridgetown port and is very critical in relation to the speed by which, to determine the speed with which we can get containers out of the port and thereby enhance the country's competitiveness. So my question is in relation directly to the role in the port and the view often held that the Ministry of Agriculture perhaps slows down our capacity to be able to move out these containers at a rate that is satisfactory. So I would like to know, so first of all, your thoughts on that, but what is now being put in place to be able to expedite competitiveness, and what is the Ministry of Agriculture doing to keep pace with these changing times, considering that Barbados' competitiveness is critical if Barbados is to get beyond the point where we currently are? Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Member. That question is so important, because I too am concerned that oftentimes when I hear this matter being raised, the Ministry of Agriculture is being singled out as the single ministry to be the ones causing delays in the port. Certainly when I sit with my team, I hear something totally different. I do recall at one stage throughout 2023, I met with the Comptroller of Customs, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Commerce to trash out what is actually taking place in the port, including the framing and setting up of a trusted trader program. All these included stakeholders, included customs brokers, and we came up with a project that integrated the electronic single window as well. And many of the things that we discovered in those conversations also related to the ships themselves coming in and the reporting from the captains on board the ships also, which is a conversation that really does not take place, but one that has been brought to my attention by the customs brokers. So what I would do so that we have clarity on this, and I really thank you, Honourable Member, for this question, because the public also needs to get clarity on this and to know exactly where we are in terms of competitiveness and how containers are cleared in the port. So I will ask the Chief Agriculture Officer Acting, Mr. Michael James, to address what is taking place. And then after him, I would ask Dr. Mark Trotman to explain how the permits are issued through his department in order for us to facilitate traders and the clearance of containers in the port. So first, Michael James, and then Dr. Trotman.
Thank you for the question, Honourable Member, Minister. Let me start by saying that it is the role of the regulatory agencies at the Ministry of Agriculture to facilitate trade. And we in no way try to stop trade or prevent people from trading. However, there are a number of risks associated with the movement, especially of fresh fruit and vegetables coming into the country. And my colleague Mark will let you know about meats. So what happens is that we do what we call a pest risk analysis. So you want to import something from overseas, it's brought in, we do our pest risk analysis, identify what risks there are that might occur. And then we provide an import permit, and most of these things are done within 3 to 5 working days, depending on the level of risk. And here is where we get often some confusion between customs and the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, when you're importing stuff, contraband, different, you can scan, you can do x-rays for that, be it weapons or whatever. But you cannot x-ray a particular product to find a beetle. You cannot x-ray it to find a virus. You cannot x-ray it to find a bacterium that might be in those products. So when we say that we can't do the 80-20 split, which means you allow 80 to come through and 20 to be inspected, there's a rationale for that. In the past couple of months, we, by the grace of God and by good detective work on our part, we would have stopped at least 2 very important pests from getting into the country. One would have related to a sweet potato, that's Silas, where persons imported sweet potato from a country where they did not have an import permit or did not have a phytosanitary certificate, but it was riddled with Silas. Silas is one of the most important sweet potato pests in the world. It flies. We do have a weevil in Barbados. As you will know, for those who like to eat sweet potato, sometimes you cut the sweet potato and all you can do is throw it away. Not even the pigs want to eat it. That pest that we have bears no comparison to the Silas that it got in, but as I said, we managed to capture it at the port. Now, could you imagine if it had gotten in, we'd be talking a completely different story. The amount of money you have to spend in order to just manage that pest is something incomparable to what we have to do now. So these are some of the things that we look at. So when persons tell us, oh, you're keeping back time or whatever, you must balance it. What we have done, we have sought to have a middle ground. What we have looked at is that for those persons who we normally trade and we know their goods within the port system that don't have to have that amount of inspection, be it, let's say, grapes, frozen products, we have put in place now that we allow those things to turn green. By green, we mean we don't have to inspect it at that point in time. We might have an inspection 2 months down the road for a shipment that come in. But we have gone through it and said, okay, well, this is what we will do. We cannot allow ourselves to become so silent that we allow everybody to do as they like. Because some persons think that free trade means trade unabated. It does not mean that. It means that there is trade, but there are limits, there are international norms that you have to look at when you allow trade, yes? So we have done that. We have also now looked at allowing, you can actually go on the computer using the Ascuto World system to actually now go in and we can say without fear, okay, we don't want to see that. And that have increased actually the amount of inspections that we have allowed to go. So basically have decreased it. So we're now linking almost a 60-40, 70-30, depending on the particular product. But there are other things that go on. You know, persons don't talk about there's still a lunch break in the port, and that time goes down. So when they blame us, we are waiting, just like anybody else, for the port to come back up in time, all right? There is the whole issue of persons not presenting the correct certificates. So you ask them, okay, where's the import permit? Oh, I forgot. Where's the phytosanitary certificate? You and I, we cannot travel unless we have a passport. The phytosanitary certificate is the passport for the particular produce. If you don't have your passport, you can't leave Barbados. If you don't have a phytosanitary certificate for a particular product, it cannot be allowed to land here. We do not know what is in it. We've had occasions where people bought a whole container without a phytosanitary certificate. What are we supposed to do? It cannot be landed. So we said, oh, you have to ship it back. You know how much grief we got for that? Oh, it's good product. No, because we can't do the same thing to the United States or England. We cannot send product without the phytosanitary certificate to those countries. So why are we to allow it to come to here? Okay, so we will be fair to everybody, but when it's time to put down our feet, we will do so without fear or favor. Yes, Dr. Trotman?
Sorry, am I allowed to follow up, please? You weren't finished?
No, not just yet. Okay, so apart from that, we would have found in our inspection scorpions. We would have found some instances, different types of lizards that come in with these things. We would have found on the Christmas trees that people love to see, all types of different bugs. Nobody sees these things. Nobody cares about them until it affects them. So we do a job that most of us pay to do, a lot of us love, and our mission is to protect our integrity, our biodiversity, and we will do that no matter what. In some cases, it might hurt some persons, and I'm sorry. I will tell them so now, I'm sorry. But we have our job to do, and we will do it, as I said again, without fear or favor. Yes, Minister.
Thank you very much for the passion, but my question, I'm coming back at the same question because...
Minister, I wanted
Oh, sorry, Minister.
Trotman to also speak to how we handle meats coming through as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mark Trotman, Chief Veterinary Officer. I want to echo the comments and the sentiment of the Chief Agricultural Officer when it comes to that, because the exact same things also apply to meat and meat products coming into the country. Imported meat and meat products pose the biggest threat to the introduction of very, very serious viruses and bacteria into the country. You would have heard about outbreaks of African swine fever all over the world and now in the Caribbean. You would have heard of highly pathogenic avian influenza wreaking havoc across Europe, across North America, and other parts of the world. Foot-and-mouth disease, another major pathogen that is easy to transmit through meat. Through meat that is actually safe to eat, but will destroy the agricultural industry if any of these viruses enter the country. And the ports of entry, whether it be the airport or the seaports, are a major conduit from for the entry of these viruses into our country. You cannot see, smell, or otherwise detect a virus. It might look perfectly fine to you on inspection, but it is contaminated, even if it is frozen, even if it's partially cooked. Sometimes in the case of fully cooked products, can still transmit certain pathogens. So we have a big responsibility, and we talked about the responsibility of the port being security and commerce. Part of security is biosecurity, which means protecting the country from the entry of biological agents, which are pathogens. So we have a big responsibility to make sure that these things do not enter the country. We do not have the resources in this country to react to an entry of one of these pathogens. It will decimate our agricultural industry. Some of them are zoonotic. They will also kill people. So the responsibility is big there. Having said that, we do recognize that we do have a responsibility to try as much as possible to facilitate trade, to facilitate the entry, and nothing we do is intended to stop that. With the advent of our participation in the Asacuto World process, that has made the process a lot faster. We're able to greenlight the low-risk products without having to necessarily do a physical inspection. And I would say that that has definitely made a big change in our approach. Once we get our electronic single window back on track, a lot of the stuff can be done electronically. We can receive electronic certificates. We can view the certificates and approve them without even setting a foot in the container park or on a ship or in any barn or shed. So that will obviously go another way in improving the rate at which we clear it. But we can't relinquish the responsibility. We do have to protect the country from these pathogens. Another way that we have tried to make sure that we can facilitate the movement of it is, as I said, mainly to do things electronically, to make sure we can pre-approve product. We do have trusted trader mechanism where, once an importer can demonstrate that they are following the rules and they are making sure that they have the appropriate certification, they have the appropriate assurances that we need to clear it, the process goes very, very quickly. There are, unfortunately, some participants in the process who are repeatedly not complying with the rules, who are, Mr. James referred to the lack of presentation of a phytosanitary certificate. In the veterinary field, we have a similar certificate, the export health certificate, which guarantees from the exporting country that the product is safe to eat. So therefore, we do review those. We can do it electronically as much as possible. At some times, we do have to do physical inspections to verify the identity of the product, because there are instances where the product comes in claiming to be one thing, and then when it's opened, it's a different thing in the container altogether. So these are things that we have to safeguard against. So in summary, I think that we've come a long way in being able to process the imports a lot more quickly than before, but we do still have a responsibility to make sure that we don't let down our stakeholders and the country by allowing these pathogens to enter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a follow-up. Obviously, I'm very happy to hear the effort and the passion of both of the persons who spoke, the efforts to safeguard Barbados, and I support those efforts entirely. However, I'm just keen to know about the use of data. Using data to make decisions. Now, having been an auditor for a significant part of my life, I know that there are ways to try to manage risk, In audit, you look at the inherent risk, the nature of the business, you look at the control risk, what are the systems in place, and you look at the detection risk. To what extent will my doing this audit produce some results? And so I would like to know our percentages almost. How much, first of all, how much are you using historical data to track, and I heard you mention it, but I'd like more details, to track the persons who import? And then when you do these inspections, what percentage of the ones that are subjected to these inspections actually show up with all of these flaws? And then the point that was made earlier in relation to a person importing without an import license, obviously that's another issue, and all those persons need a full inspection. They shouldn't even be allowed to pass anywhere without an inspection. So I understand that. But where you have the capacity to use data to make decisions, how do you use that data, and what percentages? Do you inspect 100%, 90% based on the data, and what percentage of that comes back as a problematic?
Okay, thank you for that question, Minister. The level of inspection that we do for a particular product all depends on the quantity of the product. So you can do up to 10%. It depends on where it's coming from. So we put all that into consideration. We also look at the whole issue of how, as you said, and very nicely put, of how often have we picked up things when we inspect this particular product. So I'll give you some figures that what we do right now. Cold storage, and this is regional fresh produce, consignments inspected and cleared within 24 hours of being scanned. So any fresh product right now, we do within 24 hours, that is cleared. At Shed 2, where you have personal defects, and some persons might say, but were you checking personal defects? But that is where people usually try to ease in things, So it might sound funny, but that's where they put the C's and they hide these sort of things, So yes, so they're checked. All right. 15 minutes, we actually do a check, and if we would clear that in the system if there's nothing, if they're honest and truthful. 15 minutes, we can clear the system. If we have to check, it no more than 30 to 45 minutes. What we have done in that case, we have switched now to that, and we will be looking at more of, that is the only area that we see that we can probably go to an 80-20 split, where 80% of those goods can go, and 20% we will inspect. And that is based on the data that we have collected over time, and we have looked at and realized, you know, a lot of these people just they might bring in some nuts, or they might bring in some dates. So we have looked at that and said, depending on where it's coming from, we can actually articulate and put from that. So 80-20, we can do that split. When you're looking now at the shallow draft, where you have the regional, that is where we do a lot of our inspections in terms of goods coming, fresh produce, your bananas, your cassava, things that come in from regional areas. And that we're trying now, based on the data that we would have seen, how many persons would have been persons that repeat offenders, so to speak. And we got as much as something 50-60% that you have to tell them the same thing. Where's your phyto? You said that you were bringing in 6 pounds of yams, but when we look and see you bring in 300 pounds. Now, on the phytosanitary certificate, it says 6 pounds. That means they would have checked 6 pounds. So when we look and see 300 pounds, what happened to the 294? Who would have checked those? What are we supposed to do? All right, should we let them go in and let people make some mashed cream potato or cream yam and some saltfish? That is one way some person may look at. However, those particular yams might carry things that we don't have here. So where do you draw the line? So what we are doing is that as we go through, and we are getting assistance now through the electronic single window, where we're refining our processes. And hopefully, within a matter of couple, 6-9 months, because we are working very closely with them, we will have a refined process that we can actually reduce that. But it will also call for more engagement with our stakeholders, more PR with them, as well, and I would have told the Minister and PS this, we need some more bodies. You have 3 officers at the port, cannot handle that, given that the port wants to go 24 hours. And the same thing at the airport. We're only talking right now at the port, the Bridgetown port, but something is similar also up by the airport. So we need some bodies. We do have sent this in. We are hoping we might not be able to get all, but some to assist with this. We also have gone, this is one part of digital, so all the officers have tablets. So we no longer have to use paper. They can do their thing, and so that has cut down on the time. So we're actually actively working on it. It will take some time. We're refining, and nothing happens in a day, but we're hoping that we can get to the point where, Honourable Member, Minister, that you can come in and say, yes, I have seen a difference, especially when you come to Shed 4 to collect your personal products. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very profound and highly insightful response. My final question, Chair, is in relation to disasters, recognizing that we live in a climate crisis. And for those who don't believe it, I think people need to come very soon to their senses that we are living in a climate crisis. And I think I heard you spoke briefly in relation to what we're doing to make crops more resilient, but it would be nice to expand on that in terms of having a much more climate resilient crops, given that we are in a climate crisis. But beyond that, what is the role of the Ministry of Agriculture in disasters? And I ask that because in my ministry, I have to take responsibility for people. And we all found ourselves after Elsa, which was quite unexpected, and having to find housing for persons, having to find furnishings after Elsa, and certainly having to find food after Elsa. And so I would like you to explain in more detail what we're doing generally to make crops more climate resistant. The capacity to withstand droughts, the capacity to withstand floods or sustain rain, and so that we can produce food. But beyond that, when it does happen, what is the role in dealing with people to make sure that we are able to get persons out of the post-disaster trauma as quickly as possible. And so what is the role of this ministry in that process, sir?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm going to let the Chief Agriculture Officer speak to this as well. But just to reiterate that the establishment of the tissue culture lab, which we spoke about in detail yesterday, provides us with an opportunity to set up a seed bank so that if we, God forbid, should have a natural disaster that impacted us like Elsa did, or even worse, the one thing that we know is that we can provide our farmers immediately post-disaster with the opportunity to get back to growing food. In terms of people, in terms of having to provide food for people post-disaster, there is already a mechanism in place at the ministry. And we do have contracts with various supermarkets. And we do provide isolating the Scotland district as well as one of the areas, taking the population into consideration there. And we do provide consigned goods for that area. And then for the rest of Barbados as well, we do provide consigned goods. That runs up to a period of time and is budget sensitive. And therefore, post-disaster, what we do is continue to work within the budget that we have to be able to continue to provide food through the agreements we have with the suppliers. In terms of crops that are climate resistant, I would ask the Chief Agriculture Officer to speak to that. And then the Permanent Secretary can also follow up in terms of how we handle the provisioning and the consignments and how it is worked based on the budget that we have to do it.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Minister, for the question. With respect to how we handle climate resilient crops, it comes down to the varieties. Take, for instance, if you're talking about sweet potato. Sweet potato normally comes in 3, sometimes 4 months. What we've sought to do is to look at varieties that can come in shorter than that. And the longer the time that they stay in the ground, the more prone they are to damage from the weevil. So we want short-term varieties that can handle that. When you're talking about some of the other root crops, your cassava and your yam, they can withstand a certain amount of water, a certain amount of being inundated, flooding. But above that, they will also rot. So you were looking at varieties that can stand up, and we actively seek to get these varieties into the country. We have varieties in terms of peas. We've brought in different types of peas that can handle the diseases that we have, but are also resilient against diseases that might come. So it's all about choosing which varieties you're looking at and to pick varieties that are more resilient to pests that, because of climate change, you realize that pests that normally would not have been seen in Barbados can come and affect our crops, okay? Crop plants, pests that have never come our way. We have seen, we have a, Brett Taylor could think, we have a new hopper on our okra, which we never saw before. It's a plant hopper. And late last year, we had to go and look at it, and the identification only came back earlier this year. So these are things where we look now at varieties of the okra. Everybody like the cuckoo. Who don't like cuckoo like okra slush? So we have to look at varieties now instead of using pesticides that can actually stand up to the effects of this particular pest. So that is one way. As the minister said, we will look at using the tissue culture lab because you can use different things with that. You can use, we have things with the International Atomic Agency where you can use x-rays on plants to look at producing different types of the plant, and you can pick which ones are more resilient. So there are a number of things that we can look at and that we are actively looking at. However, I must add here that there is a particular convention that we've done a cabinet paper on, where it looks at the trade or the movement of planting material. And we are not yet members or acceded to that particular convention. I know that the PS is working on that. But as long as we have that, we can trade with other countries here to bring in different varieties of tomatoes, to bring in different varieties of mangoes and coconuts and so forth. The reason that they brought in this particular convention is that they looked at persons moving what is your international property, your intellectual property in terms of particular varieties. And they don't want this person's taking up these things and moving them. So before you can trade in them, you must be a member of that convention, and it allows for a proper trade. So once we accede to that particular convention, there can be more trading. But rest assured that Mr. Brett Taylor and his team, we are actively looking at the different varieties that can stand up to certain climatic conditions. It can't stand up to all. If you have a real serious flood, a lot of things would die. But you can look at making sure that you have varieties that can do that. Now, the last point before I hand over to PS, if indeed we come to the point that we definitely cannot produce the particular crop, the Ministry of Agriculture is responsible for, when we have to bring in food, to make sure that the food that is brought in terms of fresh fruit and vegetables are good and are safe. I think people forget that, because when this time comes, people then want to give you anything. And that is a concern. Rake up anything that in the larder, for want of a better word, or in the ground or wherever, and they come and send it to you. We are there in that case to make sure that what they're saying would not do harm not only to the persons, but would not do harm to our country in terms of lessening our brain and pests. Okay? So that's another area where we are at the front line of making sure that what is given to us is safe. PS.
Before the PS speaks, I want Mr. Brett Taylor to prepare himself to speak about these new pests that we are seeing as well.
All right, good morning again to all. I'm just not gonna add too much. Most of what was said before covers, I think, the question to some extent. But just to put in context the point that the ministry's involvement in the National Emergency Management Framework is really through its role as chair of the Food and General Supplies Committee. That particular committee is normally chaired by the Chief Agricultural Officer, and it has a number of responsibilities, which I don't think I need to itemize, but essentially our overall responsibility is to ensure that we have adequate food and, as we said, general supplies, because we tend to focus a lot on the food aspect, but you would imagine that there is also an equal demand for things like toiletries and other personal care items that persons may have a demand for in the aftermath of a natural disaster. So essentially, we have signed MOUs with some of the leading retailers in Barbados of food and general supplies, in particular toiletries. We have them stored at strategic locations across the country, including at Graham Hall. Ministers mentioned the Scotland district, and you would appreciate that given the peculiarities in terms of the geographics of that area and the topology of that area, we need to make sure that that part of Barbados is self-sufficient, because if you have any roads, any road slippages or fallen trees or anything in that area which is prone to such occurrences, then we have to safeguard against the possibility of persons living in those areas being cut off from the regular supply chain. So there's there are special provisions for the Scotland district area. The ministry is also, we have a large vehicle fleet, and of course, we assist in that regard because we may be called upon to assist with the distribution of these supplies to places where they're needed. So at the start of the hurricane season, we ensure that all the vehicles are as we would say, up to speed, not literally speaking, but, you know, they're serviced, the radios and the communication capacities are fully functional, and the vehicles are all there so that we are ready to contribute to the national cause. So that's essentially, we serve as chair of the Food and General Supplies Committee, and we have the responsibility to ensure that persons are fed and that they have the necessities in the aftermath of a disaster. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, Brett Taylor, Senior Agricultural Officer. In regards to some of the areas that the Acting Chief Agricultural Officer spoke about, what I can say is that over the last couple of years, we have intercepted some new pests. Just last year, as he said, we had an issue with an import of some sweet potatoes from one of our regional partners that we found this pest that would have been devastating to our sweet potato industry here. But that is just one of sometimes too many that we can come across. For the last couple of years, we have also been seeing another pest in strawberries. Suffice it to say, if they come in dead, that's okay. But when we do our checks, sometimes we find that they are living, which is not okay. This is of great concern to us. I'm sure members will be aware of the central examination cargo facility that is to be done or is in the works. And this would be of great importance to us because then it would be somewhere that we can check produce in a much safer environment in a closed area. So these are things that are needed at the seaport and at the airport. In terms of the plant hopper, we have seen an insect coming in on okra. And after the chief and I visited some farmers and we took our samples and we sent it for identification, it came back as a new insect to the region. Some of my colleagues in other Caribbean countries have also been seeing this pest, and it is one that is not only of concern to me because of it is affecting okra, but it is also affecting one of our indigenous crops, cotton. So it's also affecting cotton. And these are of great importance to us. Some of the things that we are doing to mitigate some of the issues with climate change is that we are testing a number of varieties. Currently, we have about 8 varieties of onions that we are testing. We are looking at how they stand up to rain, how they stand up to the weather, how they stand up to different pests, how we grow them. We also have at the ministry a bank where we have about 45 different varieties of sweet potatoes. Then we have a number of different varieties of cassava, different varieties of yam, and the public can always come to the ministry, and I will not tell you that you're going to get material for an acre or even a quarter acre, but you will get pieces. And we have developed ways in which the public, in which farmers can safely produce clean planting material. And this is in conjunction with the University of the West Indies, where we looked at a sweet potato production manual. We've also looked at different varieties of papaya. So we brought in different varieties of papaya to see if we can mitigate against the what the agents call bunchy top. And this is something that has been continuously troubling the local producers of papaya. So we brought in some new varieties to look at that as well. Then we also have things like using weed fabric. We also have looking at things like staking our tomatoes. You know, Bajans aren't really used to staking tomatoes, you know, but those are some of the measures that we have also been looking at. We're also looking at using things like row covers. So all of these are things that we can do to mitigate the effects of climate change, to mitigate the effects of these new pests on our crops. And then obviously, of course, the minister spoke yesterday about greenhouse technology. So bringing in greenhouses and having the right greenhouses for our environment is also a big part of what we do. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Minister. I would have, under normal circumstances, asked about as a follow-up on the central examination facility, but I do believe that is worthy of expansion. I won't ask now, though. I just want to thank you, Minister, for your efforts to enfranchise Barbadians and for your efforts at food production and for not only your efforts, but surely your results in terms of post-disaster work. And I want to commend you and your team for so acquitting yourself with distinction during the process of this presentation in Parliament. Thank you.
Honourable Member, I want to thank you as well. Actually, those questions that you posed this morning are absolutely critical in terms of providing information to the public. And I'm glad that you've been able to do so with the level of professionalism and in the traditional mode in terms of how we operate in this honorable chamber. And that is a breath of fresh air when compared to what I have seen over the past days of these estimates in other places. The permanent secretary wants to do a follow-up on how we do the provisioning after disasters, and I would make way for him to do so before we take the next question. Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, you may proceed, Pierre.
Actually, Minister, I just wanted to comment specifically, though, on the first matter on trade facilitation that was raised as it relates to the port. And I feel obligated to speak on it, although my colleagues have already done so, because as we all know, I always say it's the permanent secretary's telephone that rings when things go wrong, or not, well, yeah, wrong. They don't normally ring when things go right, but when things go wrong, we get the calls. I had this conversation with the Honourable Minister Cummins a couple of weeks ago because of genuine concerns as it relates to the role that the ministry plays and the perceived impact that the ministry has on how things go. And I do understand. In a previous assignment, I was in charge of trade facilitation. My background provides me with a reasonable understanding of its importance and what it is. But I think sometimes we can miss a very important point. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we are so much into the technology now that very often we think that the solutions reside in technology. So that it is normal that when you speak about expanding your HR base, you often have to justify it within the context of having more access to technology. And I have to make the point that all processes that I am aware of, especially production processes, depend on certain inputs. You have labor, you have capital. In this case, we can see capital as the technology, labor as the persons in the ministry. And there is something called an optimal capital-labor ratio. The reality is, if that optimality suggests that you must have 4 persons per 8 computers, then the reality, sir, is that if you have the 8 computers and 3 persons, then you are in a position of suboptimality. The bottom line is you need 4 people to the 8. So that to just say we have the technology and how are we using the technology sometimes prevents us from remembering that there has to be that optimal combination of labor and capital. And if labor falls short, the outcome will be suboptimal. Thank you.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A pleasant good morning to you, Minister, and to your entire team. Allow me to echo the sentiments of others as it relates to commending the team and yourself for the leadership that has been provided to this very important sector, one which I believe has often not featured as prominently as it should, whether in estimates or certainly in our discourse in this chamber. I do recall a time when this particular ministry under the previous administration was caught in a battle where the then minister was fighting with the prime minister on economic policy. I think there was a view that there was supposed to be some monies that were borrowed by way of a loan from the United Arab Emirates, and the minister at that time went very silent in relation to anything related to agriculture and generally to economic development in the country. And so I know that the ministry has struggled over the years, certainly with having a consistent approach to improvements to agriculture, being able to expand our food production. I'm happy in your opening that you indicated that there has now been some increases. We've seen some increases in food production, and that is to be commended. I hope that that also trickles down in that, you know, as we increase the production, we're also ensuring that individual households are also benefiting, and that people are individually making sure that they're also growing what they eat, but also eating what they grow, because I feel that is a major pillar that as a government we must continue to encourage and to support. This administration has been preoccupied not with sheep, but we have been preoccupied with enfranchising people and enfranchising persons who are interested in farming. As you know, farming is not an area, and agriculture is not an area that a lot of emphasis is placed on in our educational system presently. I'm hoping with the reforms that we can see an even more dynamic uptake in terms of children being interested in agriculture. And I think that to the credit of entities like with the AgriFest, the support that is being given by the ministry, I think that we are starting to see and to yield some positives in terms of a change in mindset towards agriculture generally. And I just want to commend you and to ask that both the organizers of AgriFest, but also your ministry, continue to support those efforts to ensure that our young people in particular are learning about agriculture and options in terms of career choices from a very young age. Now, in terms of our empowerment of people and in enfranchising people, in similar vein as we've done in other sectors, agriculture is no different. I recall, Minister, that you would have led the charge, and I know that it's close to your heart in terms of the river plantation issue, being able to enfranchise a number of persons, farmers who were disrupted in some ways from being able to have access to water. And I want to commend you for that. As I said, we are a party that is focused on enfranchising people and breaking down barriers that stop people from being able to make a decent living. And I think that the attempts through the changes to the legislation, which were long-standing and long outstanding, have made a significant step in changing the lives of ordinary people in this country. I do note, though, that you indicated when the steps were being taken in relation to river plantation, that you were looking at things like metering, you were looking at things like the sluice gates. And I'm therefore curious, particularly because with climate change and our desire to want to get more water to our farmers, particularly with droughts always on the horizon right now, what do these estimates provide specifically for the farmers at River Plantation? Because a lot of steps have been taken, but are we where we need to be in relation to the increase in production or supply of water to the farmers, and what other efforts are the ministry taking to ensure that those farmers are not further disadvantaged in the future?
Thank you, Honourable Member and Deputy Prime Minister. The estimates for the financial year 24-25 under the BADMC are designed for us to continue to provide support to the farmers right across, but specific to the phase 2 of river where we are putting in the additional reservoir. We have requested funds in order for us to be able to do that. What I will do is let the CEO of BADMC respond in terms of where we are with the meters, in terms of where we are with the management of the Three Houses Spring. We only just got the regulations back, so that will then determine how we go about using the sluice gates and how we provide entire management structure over Three Houses. I must thank Sir David Simmons for the work he has done with us in getting us through the legislation and also the regulations. But I would like to, the CEO to speak to where we are and how that is aligned with the estimates.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the question, Deputy Prime Minister. The regulations that were mentioned have in fact been placed before our board for review and approval. They will then be forwarded on through the ministry to for proclamation. In terms of the engagement, we have started the process of creating a committee which will have oversight and provide BADMC with, I guess, a review and guidance on how we move forward. That will include members of the police force, the Barbados Defense Force, as well as the riparian owners who are going to have a continuing say, obviously, in terms of what we do at River. The objective at this stage in terms of the management of the stream is, I think, along 3 tracks. One, in terms of water quality. We have within the regulations a proposal for continual testing of those of that water. I think most would understand that that water is being used not just for farming purposes, but there are a number of persons who use it for recreation as well. So we want to ensure that that quality is maintained. In addition, there is also the question of availability, obviously, for the farming purposes, but also too for those persons who are owning lands along the stream to ensure that they have the continuing access that they would have enjoyed in the past. What we are seeking to do, however, is just to ensure that there is reasoned and reasonable access for all. I think there were concerns in the past about parties or taking advantage of their position along the course and having first access. What we are going to try to do is just to ensure that in that process, yes, they are going to have their rights, but we would also want to ensure that they do not infringe on the rights of others who come after them. So there's plans in terms of just monitoring the stream, using drones, using the water quality testing, as I mentioned, observing and ensuring that there are no blockages to the water stream, water course along its identified track. And I think finally, in terms of how we go forward and the metering that was mentioned, again, equitable access, ensuring that what persons are abstracting or utilizing for whatever purpose, there is no unevenness in that process. So the use of meters will primarily be for those using the water for agriculture, but for those owners who have pumps in the water for whatever reason or are diverting the water for whatever reason, we want to be able to identify and understand what is the effect on the stream. So there will be a period where we will have to observe first and to understand what is happening. But I think initially there is a plan once these regulations have been I guess, accepting it and we are using them, that we're going to have some robust engagements with all the parties, all the stakeholders. There will be correspondence that will be sent out very shortly just to advise them that where we are in terms of these regulations. But more so, we would want to actually meet with them on a continuing basis so that they understand what we're doing. The water quality testing, I think, though I would just want to mention, is one of our top priorities. We actually have indicated that we're going to target 6 times in a year that we will test this water at different points along the stream. So I think we need to establish a baseline. I know Water Authority have had a continuing review, typically at the head of the stream. What we're going to be doing, however, is all along this water course, so that we can start to understand where and if there are issues that arise and how we can best work with those persons who are there to manage and maintain that quality. Thank you.
Thank you for the response. Again, it is heartwarming to know that finally we are making some progress on this issue. I think oftentimes we forget the road that we have traveled. And I do know that that issue with river plantation has been a long-standing one that, you know, I think the ministry has to speak to the narrative of what has transpired, because that enfranchisement of those individuals allows them to provide for their families as well, while at the same time keeping that balance with the general population who will also be using the area. Ms. Minister, I just want to follow up on that, because while we were speaking in relation to existing farmers in, for instance, the river plantation areas, there's one area that is near and dear to my heart. You're smiling, so you know exactly where I'm going, and that is the area in the Pine Basin. Again, this is an area that has been fraught with its own issues over the years. There were, you know, different heads responsible for that particular area, a number of controversies in relation to the allocation of lands. I think that you have been able to bring to bear a better allotment of the lands in that area within the last few years. And therefore, there are persons, certainly within the surrounding communities, in particular the Pine, that have been able to benefit. I know the Ivy as well, and other areas, Burton Hill, have been able to benefit. And we're grateful for that, because unlike, you know, I tell people I have a very interesting constituency. There is the outer Pinelands area where I can leave with my trunk filled with lots of vegetation from people who, when I go into the area, and I end up going into the Pine and I give it all away, because unlike the outer areas of the St. Michael Southeast constituency, the Pineland areas don't have a lot of lands where people can actually cultivate and be engaged in farming. And so the Pine Basin project has provided an opportunity for the people of the constituency of St. Michael Southeast, certainly, to be able to have a space on the border, in a sense, to be able to cultivate lands. Now, it has not been easy, I know, because there have been some challenges, not only with the weather, but also in relation to irrigation as well. And I know that there has been some support from the ministry to help some of the farmers to be able to get started. But I wanted to get an update from you as to where we are, because when you started to plow the lands, I must tell you, the Pine Basin, my drive on my way to MTW was a beautiful sight. When I looked across the lands that were there, you were starting to see the birthing of, you know, cultivation of a number of lots of land. In recent times, the balance has not quite been struck. And I think we need urgently to get back to that. So my question to you is, where in the estimates is that injection of resources that is needed to be able to get us where we need to have those persons in those communities that can benefit from this project, truly benefiting from the project, to be able to feed themselves and their families?
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I'm going to let Mr. Innes address this as well, because we've been doing some work in the Pine Basin. Actually, we are starting back to clear the Pine Basin again. We have had some challenges with flooding, and we are working with the drainage unit to make sure that we can fix that problem. And then as I mentioned earlier, we are going to work with the Chinese. There's an area in the Pine Basin that does nothing else but captures water. And we are going to work with the Chinese to do a rice project there as well. So I'll let Mr. Innes speak to that, and he can speak to the amount of allotment gardens that will be there, and of course, how we are going to approach it and in the estimates as well.
Thank you, Minister. I just was reminded, in terms of the Pine River, we are planning a further catchment at the Three Houses factory yard. There's $6.8 million we've put a request forward for. So I just wanted to highlight that as well, just as to finish that question. In relation to the Pine Basin, I know that this is a continual challenge that we have battled with over the last several years. Maintaining that space has been a challenge. Very often, unfortunately, as farmers are placed into the area, they do encounter some challenges because of the flooding that the minister mentioned. Beyond flooding in itself, because of the nature of the soils, it tends to retain water for quite some time. So very often we have encountered scenarios where farmers who are very willing and eager to proceed, but because of the condition of the land, we are unable to bring equipment into the space in order to actually cultivate, make it ready for them. And that has been one of those things as, you've ebbed and flowed, you started, but then lost traction because of the state of the soil. Now, in terms of the plans for this year, the Master Gardener and the crop production unit that were mentioned, the Pine Basin layers are key areas that have been targeted with those projects. And in terms of being able to, one, to provide the support that was mentioned, but also two, to have the both technical and physical resources in place in order to actually facilitate, be it access to the equipment that was mentioned or planting material, et cetera, planting plans as well. So the objective here is, as we roll out these programs, to ensure that we bring the resources and have them on hand, as opposed to, unfortunately, the scenario where we have to go and come back and go and come back multiple times, which is unfortunately the scenario we've had over the last year or so, where our tractors get pulled away to be in St. Lucie or in St. Philip. We want to have a more concentrated effort to get people settled, get people started, and to be able to sustain themselves before we move away, or before the surge, as you would call it, is redirected to another area. So the plan is that we will start with individual districts as a pilot. So theirs has been identified as where we would start, but Pine Basin is where we would want to go to as the next stop. And I think the approach that we are going to employ at Layers will be essentially mirrored at the Pine Basin. Again, a focused effort using the opportunity that we have right now, hoping that we will have some fair weather over the course of the next 2 months. That will give us the opportunity to clear, prepare, and get those lands into a state where persons can take them up, and as I said, be sustained in their approach. Where there are scenarios where people have breaks for whatever reason, that's where we have found control is lost. And losing control in the Pine Basin is one of those things that guarantees that you're going to have a while before you can restore. So I think from our perspective, having this focused effort is one of those key next steps in terms of being able to turn that around. Thank you.
I think my concern following your response, though, is that there are a number of potential farmers who are now frustrated because of the length of time that the project in the Pine Basin has been taking for some of them to be able to get off of the ground. And I'm therefore just going to I appreciate that we have to prioritize. That is not lost on me. But I would want that perhaps, or recommend that perhaps while we are focused on layers, that a lot of the preparatory work to be able to accelerate the Pine Basin is also taken. In other words, two streams. Because again, let me reiterate, I represent across the road from the Pine Basin, the largest housing area in the country. And when we give to persons who live in those districts an opportunity to be able to get involved in farming, they will bring along other persons that, again, will help to alleviate some of our social problems. I don't think I can put it any plainer than that. It is therefore, now Layers is for me in the middle of nowhere, but I know that it is frustrating for me as it is for residents in St. Michael Southeast to drive past the Pine Basin and to know that there are persons who are willing to work, willing to bring along others, and they are not in a position right now or for the last few months to be able to take up that opportunity. And I would encourage you to perhaps bring in those persons and engage with them in a conversation, see if there are any other options, if there are any other training opportunities that can take place while they are waiting, because many of them will divert to other means of revenue in the interim, while they are waiting on the Lyris project to be done and then for the Pine Basin to start. And I would want to encourage you to understand the social dynamics of our society and certainly the area around the Pine Basin, and to put some resources that I'm sure you can find, Minister, to this very worthwhile project. My second question, I don't know if you want to respond, sir.
Yes,
thank you,
Deputy Prime Minister. You're absolutely right. And everyone sitting here with me would tell you that in our meetings, I always make the point, if we can't help people, they're gonna help themselves, and we're not gonna let how they're gonna help themselves. So I've always emphasized that point. The Pine Basin, I pass there every single morning. And when I pass the Pine Basin, I sometimes make calls to people at the BADMC when I don't like what I'm seeing. I took a team there to look at the area to see how we can get it going. There are some farmers to the front who are doing a really good job, but I feel that deep down inside, where we get a lot of the flooding, that we now need to get that work out the way and bring back a lot of the allotment gardens that we're looking to put in there so that we can see activity in the Pine Basin. And I do agree with you. I actually concur with you that if the Pine Basin is there and across the road, you have a community that we understand what it is like to be in that type of community. And Barbadians like to help themselves. Barbadians don't mind going through a struggle, but they must see a way. And I think our job is to provide that way for them. And therefore, I am gonna make it my business to make sure that the Pine Basin is up and running the way it should, and that the constituents of St. Michael Southeast are facilitated the way they ought to be, especially those in the Pine.
Thank you, Minister. Just to say, I think we've also spoken about the across the road from the actual Pine, what we refer to as the Pine Basin, the possibility of being able to have shade houses, other forms of agricultural opportunities there. And maybe that is an opportunity to have some of those persons who are having to wait, maybe be involved in some activities on the lands that I believe are not as problematic as across the road. So again, just suggestions to be able to ease some of the pressure off of me so I can ease some of the pressure off of you, sir.
Point taken, Deputy Prime Minister, it will be done.
Thank you. My second question relates, the mention was made of the issue of resources being moved from one location to the next, and perhaps a more focused approach now by the ministry in terms of actually completing specific areas and then moving on. As Minister responsible for Public Works, as you know, we're doing the Scotland District Road Rehabilitation Project. And that project, while it is a $230 million project, it requires us to work very closely with your ministry. And I want to just publicly thank the Soil Conservation Unit because they have been working with us very closely, providing comments on issues related to the Scotland District, as they have done tremendous work in that area over the course of the last few years. And their opinions, their input has been valued. It has helped the Complant team be able to identify the history of the district, because it's one thing to do all of your investigative works, but you know, there are a lot of people who have the know-how, the long-standing knowledge of a community, and we are seeing the benefits from the team in terms of the input that they provide at several of our weekly meetings to the entire team. So allow me to just say again, thank you to the support that we've been given. But the issue of capacity often comes up because we want to spend this $230 million. Everybody wants roads to be completed in their area. But we are also plagued with the issues of slippage. We're plagued with the issues of being able to accelerate Gabion works in a number of the districts in the Scotland District. And oftentimes when we raise the issue of resources and support from soil conservation, we are often told exactly what we heard earlier, that the team has had to come off of dealing with X to go to deal with Y. Again, it presents a challenge because for us in Public Works, the focus is on getting roads done. So whether it is working with BWA to make sure that mains are replaced, whether it is trying to work with soil conservation to make sure that the input into the plans and designs for the roads are there and in a timely manner, or that they may have to do some level of stabilization work before the contractors can go in. As you can appreciate, all of these dynamics weigh into us being able to execute the roadworks program effectively. And I note that there is a Scotland District program within the estimates. I think it's 162. What I am concerned about, specifically sub-program 167, is that I'm not seeing either a line item for the establishment of the Scotland District Authority as yet. I know we've spoken to it before. We have indicated that it is a necessity because we're doing the works, but we really need a body to manage the Scotland District and to help to educate and to advise on a number of the development plans within the area. But I don't see that reflected in this year's estimates. Now, I don't know if we are creeping before we walk in the sense that we are going to, under professional services, you have allocated for additional professional staff to be able to assist, or if it is that finance has not been so generous to allow for the establishment of the entity. But I want to make the call, Minister, if it is the latter, for the importance of this particular entity to be established. And even if it is that we start small and we grow it, I am recommending that this certainly be something that we look at to be able to rationalize the area. One of the things that keeps coming up is the issue of the disposal of sewage and certainly water in the Scotland District, which further compromises the soils. So we already have the difficulty with the soil composition in terms of it being loose, in terms of it being clay-like, in terms of it resulting in a lot of slippage. But again, what we would like to see is that collaboration between the ministries to be able to properly advise persons as to how to dispose of both the sewage and also the water. And I know that's not just your ministry, but it's obviously a responsibility for other ministries to be able to weigh in. And my last thing, which I hope that once you answer the question on the Scotland District Authority, you can also raise, is that we'd spoken about a fund, a revolving fund, that would allow persons within the Scotland District to make improvements to their homes by way of improving their disposal of water and certainly of the sewage. And again, we are seeing it, certainly Dr. Springer, Honourable Member for St. Andrew and myself are seeing it in our weekly meetings when there are issues that arise in the area. And oftentimes, yes, it may be the fault of the Barbados Water Authority, but in addition to that, we also have the issue of springs, and we also have the issue of household disposal of the wastewater and waste generally. So I want to just ask for your intervention in terms of whether there has been thought given to how the ministry deals with the issue of the Scotland District. And if not, what are the plans to be able to continue to work with us to be able to aggressively deal with these issues while we carry out the road rehabilitation program?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Well, first of all, let me state that the Scotland District Authority legislation is being reviewed by our attorney. We are working through that. We have had some delays, let me admit that. But we will get back to that legislation so that we can bring it back here and make it a suitable fit for what we are hoping to achieve at the Scotland District. Scotland District is highly technical, and our engineer, Mr. Glenn Marshall, is here, and I will let him speak to the collaboration between the ministry, your ministry, and the Ministry of Agriculture, and then also speak to how we can go forward. But what I do know is that when we complete the legislation, there will be a full management proposal for the Scotland District. Glenn Marshall.
Good morning, everyone. Glenn Marshall, Senior Agricultural Officer. Thank you, Minister. The Scotland District, as indicated, is one of those sensitive areas, 1/7 of the country. Serious issues with erosion and land slippage or instability. Not that erosion is is only in the Scotland district. It's all over the country, but we focus on it in the Scotland district. The Soil Conservation Unit has been doing work as a unit of the Ministry of Agriculture for years now in their effort to stabilize the area and maintain it so that there could be more production in the area. We have been, in terms of roads and whatnot, we've been collaborating with the Ministry of Public Works. Many people will remember the problems that were experienced, particularly in areas like Springvale. Back in 1999, 2000, the Ministry of Agriculture Soil Conservation Unit collaborated with Public Works to bring improvement, both drainage and otherwise, to that main road. And since then, it has been not 100%, but it has been there, and it is a established and relatively stable road at this point in time. We also collaborated in areas like Bath Hill. So that collaboration has been there for years, and it continues. We provide equipment, we borrow equipment, we provide gabions, and the technical staff, we're on the phone, so to speak, with one another throughout the years. The Complant project, however, has brought some challenges, additional challenges in terms of resources, both equipment and human resources. And as the Deputy Prime Minister has indicated, we've been providing comments and insights, experiences from the staff at the Soil Conservation Unit. But when it comes to equipment, we have to balance that, yes, with the priorities of Complant, but also with the other responsibilities of soil, which include cultivation and other services, tractor services for the farmers in the district as well as outside the district too. We have heavy equipment of all types, earth-moving equipment, and we have been having significant challenges with keeping all of that equipment operational at the same time. It isn't only a challenge for the Soil Conservation Unit, but also Public Works and other persons who operate large equipment. The agents simply do not maintain the level of stock of parts that are required by the equipment. So sometimes we could be waiting months, many months, for parts to come in, even though the funds are there. But we have to be waiting for those parts to come in and for the agent to provide the required service. We maintain we have a workshop, heavy equipment workshop at the Soil Conservation Unit, but there are times when even they can't resolve all the issues with the equipment, especially as a lot of the equipment now is going more electronic. We have tried training staff in that area, but we simply don't have that in-house capability. So we're going back to the agents for parts, for service, for almost everything. But that collaboration is there. It will be maintained. We attend meetings, the Complant meetings every Monday morning, or whenever they're called recently, and also with, up to yesterday, field visits to see what's the situation in and around the particular projects that we're working on now. So in terms of collaboration with MTW, that is there. If you're looking at the other activities of Soil Conservation Unit. The primary one being the engineering component, where we look at trying to stabilize the area and control springs and whatnot. Again, that has been ongoing. We have been trying to, wherever significant springs are identified, we try to harness that water, like in the Greenland area or the Borden area, where whatever drainage water we catch through the subsurface drainage systems that we've installed, we try to bring it into a pond so that the farmers in the areas can have access to it. In the Borden area, we've been working with the BADMC to rehabilitate that system for farmers in the area and other activities. We are also, as part of the water augmentation program, looking at other areas, for argument's sake, Haggett's in St. Andrew. We have rehabilitated one of those, the reservoir that's there, and that is now available for providing irrigation water to the nearby orchards in that area. With respect to, you had mentioned disposal of wastewater. Our drainage systems in the area, they do pick up or plan to pick up spring water, but because of the housing areas in the area, they do also still pick up some of the sewage, the water disposed from houses, be it from just rainfall runoff or sometimes deep in the profile from sewage systems, damaged septic tanks and whatnot. We have had initial discussions, this would have been years ago though, not recently, whereby we were suggesting that some of the communities within the district are actually sewered with small or compact sewer systems, because a lot of the sewers, the effluents from the homes actually get into the water systems, the water courses, and eventually end up out at sea. So there's need in looking forward. It isn't in this year's budget. We haven't looked at that in particular, but there is need for that discussion with the Water Authority and Sanitation Services Authority and whatnot to look at those packaged treatment plants, similar to what you may have with a big hotel for particular communities within the Scotland district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall, for, I think, that the clarity that I think the public needs as well, because while I, in some ways, know the answer that you will provide, I think it is important that those living in the Scotland district and certainly wider Barbados understand why we are spending the monies there, but also what are some of the real challenges on a daily basis that the ministries are facing in trying to grapple with those issues. Now, I appreciate the point that we have to find balance between Complan and the other ongoing day-to-day issues that the ministry may have. But I do feel that with us spending the amount of money that we are on the Scotland district, that there must be a case made for additional resources to the Soil Conservation Unit to be able to support the roadworks program. It cannot be that we are working feverishly to get these works done, and then we don't have the additional resources to soil conservation, because whether it is the technical expertise in the form of professional services, or whether it is your ability to have, I know you have trained up Gabion workers to support. We are also using some of the persons from the ASH program to train up, that have been trained to be able to support the Gabion worker program. But imagine if we were able to have those additional resources through the Soil Conservation Unit to have that oversight to help us to escalate the roadworks program. program. And particularly in an environment where we are working against the issues of climate change, I think that these estimates, if there's any leeway to reconsider how we address these issues that I've raised, I think that consideration ought to be given to it. Because I honestly don't see anything reflected, and I think on the admission of Mr. Marshall and you, Minister, there's been no account taken to the existing challenges that are currently faced by Soil Conservation Commission, and certainly my constant request to them to be able to help support the activities of MTW. So I would hope that some reflection may take place before we close this debate in relation to that matter. My last question, because I know we have to extend the time given that we have a number of other questions that are to be posed under this head. My last question is really a follow-on on the issue of human resource capacity generally for the Ministry of Agriculture. And it comes from a position of when I was Minister of Education. We were looking at the HOPE and the JUKE project, which obviously has been funded by the People's Republic of China. And one of the concerns at the time was exactly how these two institutions were going to help us to build out the agricultural sector. And we had established a task force which was led by Dr. Charleston Brathwaite, who I am sure is well familiar to all of you for his experience in this area. And along with the Ministry of Agriculture and the tertiary institutions, we took the opportunity to delve a bit deeper into what were really the needs of the sector. And when I say needs, not just equipment and resources, but looking at the professional expertise that was required across the entire sector. What are the training needs that the tertiary institutions, the primary institutions needed to have in order to better equipped our people to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that were being presented in the agricultural sector. And one of the things that was, well, a few of the areas that were highlighted at the time, certainly by the then Chief Agricultural Officer and the team at the ministry, was that the ministry required integrated pest management specialists. They needed as well certified crop advisors. They also needed nursery technicians, and they also required post-harvest specialists. And I'm sure there are other areas that may be required. Given all that we are doing in this sector, given the increase in the food production, given the CARE program, the FEED program, and all the other acronyms that the Ministry of Agriculture has come up with over the course of the last couple of years, my simple question is, are these estimates taking into account the needs of the sector as it relates to professional services, or the engagement of persons who need to be able to help to better support the existing staff complement? And I know that all of us are grappling with the issue of human resources across ministries, but where we can't bring on people, I know that we are able also to have the assistance of international organizations, regional bodies to help to support. Now, I don't know that we can continue to try to connect the dots from primary to tertiary to these institutes that are going to come on stream very shortly without addressing the deficits that exist in the ministry to help to support the sector. And so my simple question is, are we catering for this, whether in the short term or in the long term? Because I don't see any increase, certainly in the personal emoluments, and I don't see it unless it is hidden somewhere in terms of the professional services. So if the minister can perhaps just take us through, do we have it, or do we need it, or are we getting it from external sources?
DPM, I'm going to let the Permanent Secretary handle this, simply because this is a matter that we've been really working on. I have been receiving cuts in budgets, not increases. And the truth is, we still have outstanding and to fill the post of Deputy Chief Agriculture Livestock and Deputy Chief Agriculture Crop. And this has been an ongoing situation. Yes, I agree, we need resources in order for us to achieve our deliverables. But I think the best person to address this would be the Permanent Secretary.
Good morning again. Good afternoon. The Deputy Prime Minister answered the question directly. No, the estimates do not, the way we presented them, do not capture that directly. or it is not explicitly captured within the estimates. There are aspects of the estimates, though, where the need for additional resources is implicitly presented. What we have been doing, I've spoken to it before, and the process has taken a little longer than I anticipated for various reasons. One of the main reasons is the continued dynamism within the sector, where each time you think you have it right, you have further consultation and you recognize that there's a need for further adjustment. So we are going to present a separate document that speaks to addressing those HR capacities. But I think there is a prohibition in terms of the extent to which you can include those things within the estimates. You know, once there's no one in the post, et cetera, you don't just, you know, et cetera. So we thought we will do that. We will do that separately. But there are, we've been continually asking for some positions to be filled. And I'll be first to admit that I do not expect that this ministry would ever get back to that stage where we had such vast numbers of persons. I think I addressed it earlier with the extent when I mentioned the use of technology now, but still recognizing that there are some critical positions that need to be filled. Well, you've asked, so I have to say it. we are in a position at the ministry now where, because again, the age profile of the ministry, I don't know, sometimes I wonder where our level of fortune is, because we've been impacted since I joined the ministry in 2019. We've lost, I think, about 5 persons to that cause or that we have no control over. I prefer to put it that way. And the other thing too is that persons are going in batches. So it's not, you know, I recently looked at the organogram at the ministry and saw a particular unit where we are going to lose 3 persons out of the 6 within the next 3 years. And that is nothing to just glance over. It is important. So that while we don't expect to get back the numbers, we're hoping that we do get some assistance in terms of filling some very strategic positions. The Deputy Chief Agriculture Officers was mentioned earlier as one. And then those other positions that you made a reference to come directly from, again, the changing nature of agriculture. You called some of the positions just now, I couldn't even remember them. But they're because some of the positions we have are no longer relevant. But before we even talk about numbers, we have to get the proper training in place. Some of those areas of expertise are so specific. I mean, you don't have that training, those training modules in Barbados. In some cases, we contact St. Augustine, UWA, where there's an agriculture faculty, and in some cases, they do not have them either, which means that we have to source that level of training from the outside. One other thing, too, that we have to pay some attention to is I don't want to say quality. I don't think I'm qualified to make reference to the quality of anyone's programs. But we certainly do observe that there's some deficit in terms of the programs that are being offered at some of the educational institutions that prepare persons to come into the sector. And my view is that, you know, I use the analogy that I use is the primary school prepares you for secondary school. Your secondary experience prepares you for your tertiary experience. But when we look at it as it relates to agriculture, there is a gap somewhere where being successful even at a particular level does not necessarily mean you're ready for the next level. So we have to, I think, spend some time sitting too with the institutions that prepare persons to come into the sector and say to them, well, you know, perhaps you need to look back at your various syllabus in the different areas and bring them along, because you're training, you're getting a certificate, but then you're not necessarily functional given the way that the agriculture sector is going. So we have to do it strategically, and we have to do it in a systematic way, because I don't think you just want to throw resources at a cause just for the sake of it to tick a box. But then if the efficacy of the resources are not at the level that are required, then you're still not going to get the desired level of result. So it's sometimes a lot more complex than just saying, I want 2 more people, I want 3 more people, or, you know, bring on, you know, we really need to look at it in a holistic way, and we are doing that.
Thank you, PS, and thank you, Minister. I have no further questions at this stage. Just to say that I totally agree with you wholeheartedly on the changes that certainly need to be made and the challenges. I think it's an issue of skills deficits across the ministries. As it relates to agriculture and certainly the task force, I don't think you would have been a permanent secretary at the time, but it may be worth having a read of Dr. Brathwaite's report, because it does address where some of the deficits were at the tertiary institutions and what the hope was in terms of the HOPE project, no pun intended, and also the Duke project, to be able to provide persons for actual work or oversight of the works that were actually needed in the agricultural sector as well. Mr. Chairman, I therefore beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker, and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 12:25.
The question that this Honourable Chairman be suspended until 12:25 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This Honourable Chairman stands suspended until 12:25 p.m. This sitting is resumed.
Mr. Speaker, we revert to papers.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the loan contract number 5856 OCBA Sustainable Development Policy Program 3 with the Inter-American Development Bank for a policy-based loan.
Orders of the day reverted.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 67-3. We have already almost reached the limit for the head of agriculture, and it is clear that there are several other individuals members who would wish to speak. So I therefore move the suspension of Standing Order 67-3.
The question is that Standing Order 67.3 be suspended for the remainder of the day sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Standing Order 67.3 is suspended for the remainder of the day sitting.
We revert to government business.
We revert to Standing Finance Committee.
This House is in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I know you operate in the sphere of modesty. And with a little nudging, I know that you would elaborate on, the question that my good friend from St. Michael's South would have asked earlier about the climate change phenomenon and the effects on the agriculture industry. I am well aware that through a JEF collaborative funding with FAO, that you have embarked on a project called Barbados the Acceleration Project, transitioning to climate resilient agri-food systems. Very, very, very good project. I know that you would like to elaborate on that, but the buzzword for me and my question is about bees today and apiculture. And apiculture specifically, about apiculture. I want to know from you, and you know that I have on reserve and unrepentant love for biodiversity. We know the importance of bees to the ecosystems. We know in the world, for instance, there are over 20,000 species. In Barbados, we may speak specifically of the honeybee and the bumblebee. And most Barbadians will associate the bees with the making of honey. Beeswax, for instance, royal jelly from the bees. But it is more than that for me as minister. As I said just now, the bees are an essential part of our biodiversity makeup. Their role in climate change is well renowned. The pollination of the flowers produce the seeds. The seeds produce the plants. Plants are an essential component and part of our green climate sink for the harmful carbon dioxide. Again, the importance of bees and the role in climate mitigation. Bees have a significant function as it relates to ensuring the survival of other species in the food chain. Bats, birds, you name it. Their importance can never be underestimated. I am saying to you, Minister, that your ministry has embarked on a serious apiculture program which has seen the rehabilitation of bees in this country. And I want to know the challenges that you're having and obviously give you the opportunity to elucidate a little more on your project, the production of honey, which is indigenous, which has indigenous flavor and taste to us Barbadians, and to be able to say to the rest of Barbados that we are on the right buzz track. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Just like you, I also love bees. I think all of us do. But yes, biodiversity is part of everything that we do at the Ministry of Agriculture. And we are always cognizant of the fact that we have a responsibility to make sure that we work in an inclusive fashion when it relates to matters that would impact on our biodiversity. And that is the reason why the ministry is always so conscious of what we do at our ports of entry, because we note the risk involved and the impact that it can have on our biodiversity. But as it relates to bees, I would ask Mr. Brett Taylor to address what you have raised and let him speak in detail in terms of all the benefits and how we are proceeding with apiculture in Barbados.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon again. In terms of apiculture industry, we have sought to train over the last 4 years, 5 years just before COVID came, a number of persons in beekeeping. As I elucidated to yesterday, some of the persons that we have trained are not active. We have also had many challenges, and as such, persons in the industry would also have encountered many challenges over the last couple of years. We spoke about, in this chamber, about Elsa. We spoke about Storm Brett, not Brett spelled with the same way as my name, but Storm Brett as well. That had an impact on the bees. Last year, we had one of the hottest days recorded in Barbados, 34.2 degrees Celsius, I think it was. And we had a prolonged dry spell. The year before, we had rains that we have never really seen in Barbados. And even last year, we had rains from August down to January. And it is also a fact that within the last couple of days, we had some torrential rains at the beginning of this month. So all of these are things that impact on the bees. During the last 4 years, 5 years, we have trained over 360 persons in beekeeping. However, based on the work that the officer that deals with the apiculture unit, of those persons, as of November 30th, 2023, there were 418 beekeepers listed with the ministry. And that was an increase of about 52 from the previous year, 2023. And this resulting in a combined total of 783 colonies or hives that were recorded. And this was an increase of about 83 hives from the previous period. Now, of those 418 listed beekeepers, only 82 were actively engaged in rearing bees. So out of those persons that we trained and the other persons that were engaged in beekeeping, so from 418, only 82 were actively engaged in rearing bees. So this accounts for just 19.6% of the total listed. Then we had a breakdown of the number of apiaries by colony size. Persons with 1 to 9 hives, 59. 10 to 19, 12. 20 to 29, 3. 30 to 39, 3. 40 to 49, 1. 50 to 59, 2. 60 to 69, 1. And over 70, just 1. So that is the actual breakdown of what we had and what we were seeing. So, of this, of this 82 listed apiaries, that most of them just had less than 10 colonies. So for us to expand, we have to get people into expanding the amount of hives that they keep. A lot of the persons that are currently in beekeeping are hobbyists. Then a lot of the persons that are on the list as having been trained as beekeepers or with the Barbados Apicultural Association are listed as being beekeepers. Their primary job is one, collecting swarms, removing hives, probably destroying hives that may be in areas where it's not feasible for them to be maintained, and also collecting wild honey. And that in itself lends some issues as well. So what we have also embarked on is the collection of honey from some of these different hives and taking it to the Government Analytical Services Laboratory to be tested. So remember, we're using this honey as a food. So we're also testing the honey to make sure that it is safe to eat. And this will not only be for local honey, but we will also be doing it for our imported honey. Some of the other issues with the beekeeping is that persons going to it looking to see if they can make quick money. But as with everything that we do, and as we always tell the farmers, you have to manage your hives. You have to manage your sources of production. You cannot just, bees will do it naturally, but if you are going to the state where you are going to have a managed colony of hives, you have to manage it properly. We do have some issues in Barbados with one called the varroa mite. That is a problem with the bees, but our bees can be, what can I say? They manage to keep the mite away, or they control or manage the mite in the hives, not being aggressive, but by being cleanly, okay? So they clean themselves well. One of the other things with the honey production is that because some of the hives are not managed well, you don't have the level of production that you would have if you were in North America or some of these other places. We have looked at doing a queen bee replacement or rearing queen bees from some of the better performing hives that we have here. And that is a skill that we have to now train some of these beekeepers in. We had brought in previously some professionals out of the US from Florida, and they had done some initial training, and there are a couple of the local beekeepers that have the ability to do it, but more need to be trained in that way. Another part of the issue is that Barbados is small. We do not have many pure stands of anything except sugarcane. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for St. John spoke about bees in his area and mangoes, a mango orchard. How big is the mango orchard? What other plants are around? Can we say that the honey is only being produced from mangoes? Bees can forage up to 2 miles away. In our local context, that is what? 1/5, 1/6 of Barbados. So they may be foraging on other crops. So is there an abundance of these other types of plants that are available for the bees? And then if you have, as I said, we're a small island. If you have spraying in one part of the country or in the forest area, they may have a direct impact on the bees. We have the Ministry of Agriculture have always preached using safe chemicals or chemicals that, are not too harmful to the environment. But what is a farmer, what is a householder out there spraying with that may impact the bees in their foraging? Then another issue is the officer that prepared this document that I was taking those numbers from, he's not a beekeeper. We have a beekeeper post that is not filled. So these are some issues that we have again. And beekeeping is not a 8:15 to 4:30 job. Sometimes I get calls on weekends. You get calls at night. So there are issues people will call that bees are in their homes. So these are many issues that you have to deal with. And it's something that it is not as I said, it's not a 8:15 to 4:30 job. One of the things that we've also been looking at is having a apiculture industry development, a rebate, where we're looking at having a rebate of up to 50%, up to a maximum of $500 per annum for approved apiary gear, and also 50% up to a maximum of $1,500 per annum on approved apiary inputs, because the cost of the equipment, the cost of the soup, the boxes, sometimes they're not cheap. So these are some things that we're looking at. These are things that we have to do looking at training. These are things that we have to do looking at bringing legislation to look at how we manage the industry. Another thing that we have looked at is having a central facility where all the beekeepers can bring their honey and it can be bottled with a Belgian brand. Withstanding, they can do some bottling of their own brand, but if we want scale, we need to look at that Belgian brand. So these are just some of the things that we are looking at the Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you.
Right. I know for a fact that your ministry, through your minister, of course, is working with the Rotterdam Convention as it relates to pesticides. Because I know you didn't mention, but pesticides tend to threaten the bees as well. For fogging, and how we treat the fogging is also an adverse factor as it relates to the survival of our bees. I don't know if you want to say anything about either the pesticides that persons use, because this is a forum where we can educate Barbadians as well in terms of the types of pesticides. That's why I always advocate for biological diverse methods to treat before we go to these things. Pesticides, for instance, and fogging. I want your thoughts on those two things that affect our bee population.
Thank you, Minister. As I said before, we at the ministry, we always look at least harmful chemicals, okay? Or chemicals with lower toxicity. What is of concern is that I am sure that the Ministry of Health would have put out notification of where they are fogging. And when they are doing this, one, either for the beekeepers to cover, or if they can move their hives from the area, would be good. In the case of the chemicals that the Ministry of Health uses. I know for sure that they use malathion, but there are some other chemicals that the ministry should be able to use that would not be as harmful as malathion to control the mosquitoes. And as they always say, it is a social problem where you have to clean your environments, and that will help get rid of a lot of the mosquitoes. We have tried to put in place things where we know where the bees are being kept, where the hives are. That is some of the work that the officer has done. But even with that, once again, the bees, they don't stay in the hives, they fly. So in their quest to gather food, they may encounter chemicals. And that is a hard fact that we can't get away from. In their quest to gather food, they will encounter some instances of food that has been sprayed. Thank you.
All right. My second question, Minister, the projections over the next 40, 50 years is that arable soil as we know it will be a thing of the past. And this, of course, is because of the combination of climate change, pollution, unfortunately, because of anthropogenic behaviors of mankind, and biodiversity loss. We, in our ministry, along with yours, have started a project, the Regional Soil Care Project, which looks at rehabilitating our soils so that they become viable once again. Your ministry is doing a lot of work, especially in the Scotland district area, in this regard, using the Soil Conservation Unit. The importance of this work is at the forefront of the survival of the species of plants as we know it, our food security. I want you to be able to elaborate on this particular project and what else your ministry is doing to ensure the survival of our soil as we know it. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Yeah, I do know that we also signed an MOU to deal with soil-related matters, soil degradation, etc. And this is an MOU with Sadhguru. Glenn Marshall has been the officer in the ministry that has been dealing with soil matters, and I would let him speak in terms of what we are doing in collaboration with your ministry.
The Soil Care Project, the Ministry of Agriculture has been, again, collaborating with our project. We are working very closely with them. Up to last year, we had, as part of the project, a national soil sampling program across the island, and that is, we were one of, I think it's six countries who will be part of that overall project. That level of soil sampling has not been done since back probably in 1966 with our Vernon and Carroll study. But together with that, the Ministry of Agriculture has, I don't want to say come back to soils, because we're always dealing with soils. But a couple of years ago, we started back that soil analysis program, starting with our agricultural stations, the 5 agricultural stations, and we're looking to expand on that now. Soil is one of those resources that we have to protect as long as possible. We speak to water augmentation, but soil can be considered as a reservoir of water for the plants. Yeah? And we have to treat it with respect. The analysis that we have done, that initial analysis has indicated that components like organic matter is extremely low in our soils. And that is one of the components, one of the many components that is essential to trying to maintain moisture in the soil and all other types of activities. So we're trying to build back, or first of all, identify the quality of the soil that we have now. I mean, there have been many years where it has been basically sugarcane, all right? But with the amount of diverse farming that we're doing now, crop farming, we've been putting on fertilizer, but we have to look at how efficient and effective that fertilizer is. And the start to that would be, what do we actually have in the soil? And then you build on that. If you don't know what you have, you can be easily putting on too much. That's being leached, that is getting into our groundwater and complicating the situation. And on the other side of that, if you don't know what you have, you may not be putting on sufficient to reach the potential yields that the crop is basically designed to reach. So soil is critical. We have a limited amount. Some people may say some crops, like lettuce and others, you don't actually need soil anymore. But the vast majority of the crops that we require or that we use in Barbados and across the world will continue to need soil as that anchor. We have to look at soil fertility, the soil care project, as well as other projects we're looking at. We'll be addressing that. There's a cooperation, a project with Morocco, soil fertility project, also looking at soils. So the ministry has recognized that and is bringing emphasis back to that as part of the overall need, the inputs that will be required to improve crop production and yields and efficiency of use of fertilizers and all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that it is essential, not only for farmers, but for all Barbadians, for us to set up proper soil management protocols. So coming out of these assessment studies in terms of the constituents of soil, I would suggest that we start having some protocols for the management of our soil, because this is essential for the survival of plants and animals as we know them. So, and I know that you're venturing into phase 2 of this project with about 12 other Caribbean countries, so we look forward to your continued work. My last question, Minister, you spoke earlier, especially in your introduction, about our tissue culture lab. This is new and exciting for me. We know that we can actually produce a tree from the regeneration from a single cell. This is exciting. It can ensure that germplasm is alive and we get in the sterile stock as we know it, as we face the vagaries of climate change and diseases, and new diseases, new viruses that affect trees and plants. Minister, there's a concern for me as it relates to citrus greening. Barbadians are no longer able to pick a lime as we know it. The grapefruit tree is something of the past. I don't know the last time I see a Belgian grapefruit. The scientists may call it the Honglongbing disease that affects our citrus trees. I am asking you, Minister, with the advent of such a facility, what is your plan to regenerate and rehabilitate our grapefruit as an indigenous fruit? Because that's what it is to me. The medical potentials of grapefruit are well renowned. The boosting of the immune system, the high levels of vitamin C, the ability to help with the skin, and its high antioxidant potential. These are things that certainly will not go unnoticed in these trying times as we battle the vagaries of zoonotic illnesses. Minister, are there any plans in your ministry to use the tissue culture lab to rehabilitate not only grapefruit, but to be able to produce this sterile stock that would not be prone to this vector type borne disease known as Hong Long Bing disease or citrus greening that is affecting our citrus plants as I speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. This is what you call this the science fair. Yes, we are in fact using the tissue culture lab to make sure we can address a number of things that have been impacting our plants. The Chief Agriculture Officer will speak to what we are doing in terms of tackling citrus greening and how we are utilizing our facilities, because I am aware that we also have a facility at Soil as well. And he can speak in detail to what we are doing in terms of tackling citrus greening and other plant diseases.
Thank you, Minister, for the question. Citrus greening. Wow. Hong Long Bing, first seen around the China, Asian area, affects all types of citrus, every single type, and the families of citrus, Rutaceae, which could also include the curry plant, as well as the plant that a lot of us used to do our fingernails with when we were younger, when we aging, myself, sweet lime. There is no cure for citrus greening. And this must be made quite clear. I think some persons might think that you can just go there, you can spray. There is no cure. It is vectored by an insect called a citrusilla. And this thing flies all over the place. In Brazil, they have destroyed millions of trees in trying to control this. In Florida, same thing has occurred. In fact, this is one of the reasons why orange juice has gone up in price, because you have had reduction in yields of oranges. All famous lemonade made from limes in Barbados, you don't find a lot because you don't have a lot of lime trees right now in Barbados. So what do? You don't throw up your hands and say, I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of you can increase the fertilizer, using organic fertilizer as well as others, to give the plant a bigger boost, and they will survive for a period of time. But once they catch the disease, you can't get it out of the system. There's nothing that you can do, no systemic pesticide that you can use that can get the disease out of the plant. So they've also looked at biotechnology, where they've looked at using genes from the spinach plant to go into the, to put into the citrus. But some people say, oh, that's GMO, that's, you know, dealing with some serious things there. But they have looked at that. They're also looking at something called the CRISPR, which is using the genes to turn off the ability of the particular disease to infect the plant. That is higher technology. That is something that they're working on, but they have not come up with plants yet that are sufficiently tolerant or resistant to this disease. In Florida, they're using a system called a cups, where you actually surround the plant with insect-proof netting, and the trees can grow. It's an expensive venture, and something that we are looking to actually try down by the Soil Conservation Unit. I'm saying all that to say that it is not as easy an issue to deal with. Although using tissue culture, which they use in Jamaica and they use it in Belize, that you can have a clean plant emerging from tissue culture. Whenever that plant meets the environment, as long as the psyllid is around, it can become infected. The thing is to ensure that the plant, as long as it's infected between the 3rd to 5th year, you can at least get some limes or grapefruit or whatever from the trees. But if it becomes infected prior to that, the tree will die, all right? And so that is one of the things that they'll be looking at. We'll be seeking to get the officers trained in using that particular technology, because you're not using just tissue culture, you will be using thermotherapy, which you're using a cold method to destroy the particular disease within the cells before you go into actually doing the actual tissue culture. So that is something that we're looking at. The ministry, since this thing has come up, is also looking at preparing the propagation area at soil conservation. We know that the thing is to keep the trees as clean as possible before we sell to persons. This is one of the reasons that we had closed down. We stopped producing citrus at the soil conservation. So once that is prepared and we can have that covered, we can produce more plants with we know that these are clean, and that we will also give the plant a better chance to survive even if it becomes infected later on. And that will be what we'll be doing. And this is something that we've included in this year's estimates also. And we are hoping that we will make sure that we can get those greenhouses done at soil conservation, so that we can move forward now in bringing in also more material, citrus material. But I dare say there are some grapefruit trees still standing in Barbados, as well as shaddock. And what we will do is use that material to clean up and then replant. So there is a way forward that we have seen, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get that done, albeit not all of it, but most of it during this financial year, Minister.
Yeah. Thank you, and I look forward to the day, Minister, with the $47 million injection for the lab, to be able to have that genetic modification that you're speaking about, where you introduce the spinach as part of the whole genetic pool, so you can bring a resistant, citrus resilient plant as it relates to treating the Hong Long Bing disease. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I beg that you do advise the Speaker of progress made and ask leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. All member for St. Joseph.
Speaker, I beg to move that we do suspend the sitting until 1:30.
2:30.
Sorry, 2:30 for lunch.
The question is, this honorable chairman be suspended until 2:30 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended until 2:30 p.m.